Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Everyday English Podcast. I'm Sarah, and I'm really happy you're listening today. As always, I'm not here alone. Alex is with me, and we're going to explore another important English word together.
Hi, everyone. It's good to be back. And yes, as usual, this is not a lesson where we rush through definitions. We're here to slow down, talk, and understand how English words work in real life.
Exactly. In each episode, we choose one word and really sit with it. We talk about how it's used, how it feels, and why it matters not just for language learning, but for communication and relationships.
And today's word is a very human one. It's a word you hear in conversations about relationships, mental health, education, leadership, and social issues.
Today's word is empathy.
It's a word many people use, but not everyone uses correctly. And understanding it well can completely change how you communicate in English.
So take a moment, relax, and listen slowly. Let's talk about what empathy really means.
At its core, empathy means the ability to understand and share another person's feelings or perspective. It goes beyond simply recognizing that someone is sad, stressed, confused, or happy. Empathy is about trying to understand what that experience feels like from the inside, from the other person's point of view. When you feel empathy, you don't immediately judge, correct, or compare. Instead, you pause and ask yourself questions like, what might this situation feel like for them? What pressures or emotions might they be carrying right now? Empathy involves both imagination and attention. You imagine yourself in another person's situation, but you also pay close attention to what they are actually expressing. This includes their words, their tone of voice, their facial expressions, and even what they choose not to say. In this way, empathy requires listening carefully, not just hearing words. This is why empathy is considered an active process, not a passive one. You don't simply wait for someone to finish speaking. You engage mentally and emotionally with what they are sharing. You respond thoughtfully, often with questions or statements that show understanding rather than solutions. For English learners, this idea is especially important. Empathy is not just a psychological concept you read about in books. It is something people do through language every day. People express empathy by choosing gentle words, by responding with understanding, and by showing that they are truly listening. When you learn how empathy works in English, you are learning more than vocabulary. You are learning how to communicate respectfully, how to build trust in conversations, and how to respond in a way that feels natural and human. This skill is just as important as grammar or pronunciation, and often even more important in real communication.
Many people think empathy simply means being kind or polite, but it's deeper than that. Being polite is about behavior. Empathy is about understanding. You can be polite without being empathetic. You can say the right words, but still fail to understand how someone actually feels. Empathy requires effort. It requires slowing down and truly listening, not just waiting for your turn to speak. This is why empathy is often discussed in connection with emotional intelligence and communication skills.
A very common confusion, especially for English learners, is between empathy and sympathy. Sympathy means feeling sorry for someone. Empathy means trying to understand what they are going through. For example, if someone says, "I'm really struggling right now," sympathy might sound like, "I'm sorry to hear that." Empathy might sound like, "That sounds really difficult. Do you want to talk about it?" Both are kind, but empathy creates a deeper connection. Understanding this difference is extremely useful in real conversations, especially in English-speaking cultures where emotional communication matters.
Empathy appears in daily English far more often than we realize, especially in casual conversations with friends, classmates, colleagues, or family members. It often shows up in small, simple responses rather than long or emotional speeches. When someone says, "I'm exhausted," "I feel overwhelmed," "I'm worried about my future," An empathetic response does not immediately try to fix the problem. It does not rush into advice, solutions, or comparisons. Instead, it pauses and acknowledges the emotion behind the words. This is an important point for English learners, because many learners believe that being helpful means giving advice right away. In English-speaking cultures, however, empathy often comes before advice. Phrases like, "That makes sense," "I can understand why you feel that way," "That sounds really hard." These expressions don't solve the problem, but they do something equally important. They make the other person feel heard and understood. They tell the speaker, "Your feelings are valid, even if you don't fully share the same experience." What makes these phrases especially useful is that they are simple and natural. They don't require complex grammar or advanced vocabulary. Yet when used correctly, they make your English sound warm, mature, and emotionally intelligent. For learners, practicing these expressions can completely change the quality of conversations. Instead of sounding distant or mechanical, your responses begin to feel human and connected. People are more likely to open up, continue talking, and feel comfortable communicating with you. Empathy in daily English is not about perfect sentences. It's about choosing words that show attention and care. And once you become comfortable using these small empathetic phrases, your conversations will feel more natural, meaningful, and authentic.
I want to share a reflection here, because empathy is something many people learn through mistakes. There were times when someone shared a problem with me, and my first reaction was to give advice or explain what they should do. I thought I was being helpful, but over time I realized that what people often want first is not a solution. They want to be understood. When I started listening more and talking less, conversations changed. People opened up more, trust increased, and communication became more meaningful. Empathy is not about having the perfect response. It's about being present.
Empathy becomes especially important in moments of misunderstanding, because misunderstandings are a natural part of human communication. They happen even when people speak the same language fluently. When language, culture, or background is different, misunderstandings become even more common. Differences in culture, personal experience, education, and social norms can easily lead to confusion. A word, a tone of voice, or even silence can be interpreted in very different ways. What feels normal to one person may feel rude, cold, or confusing to another. In these moments, empathy helps us slow down. Instead of reacting immediately or judging quickly, empathy encourages us to pause and ask ourselves, what might the situation look like from their perspective? Could there be something I'm not seeing or understanding yet? Empathy shifts our response from assumption to curiosity. Instead of thinking, they are wrong, we begin to think, maybe they see this differently. This small shift can prevent conflict and open the door to clearer communication. For English learners, this is incredibly powerful. You may not always have perfect grammar, pronunciation, or vocabulary. You may struggle to express complex ideas exactly the way you want. But empathy can still make your communication respectful, effective, and meaningful. When you listen carefully, show patience, and respond with understanding, people are far more likely to focus on your message rather than your mistakes. Empathy creates a sense of connection that goes beyond language accuracy. In many real-life situations, classrooms, workplaces, friendships, empathy matters more than perfect English.
It allows communication to continue even when words fail, and it turns misunderstandings into opportunities for learning rather than sources of frustration. In education, empathy plays a crucial and often underestimated role. Learning is not only an intellectual process, it is also emotional. Students bring stress, fear, motivation, confidence, and doubt into the classroom, whether that classroom is physical or online. Teachers who show empathy understand that students learn at different speeds and in different ways. They recognize that behind poor performance or silence, there may be anxiety, personal difficulties, or lack of support. An empathetic teacher does not lower standards, but they adjust their approach. They explain differently, listen more carefully, and create an environment where students feel safe enough to ask questions. Students who practice empathy also benefit greatly. When students understand that their classmates may be struggling in ways they cannot see, communication improves. Group work becomes more cooperative. Students feel less embarrassed about making mistakes and more willing to ask for help. This kind of environment supports learning far more effectively than pressure or competition alone. In academic English, empathy is often discussed in a structured and formal way. You might encounter sentences such as, "Empathy improves communication between teachers and students." Developing empathy supports inclusive learning environments. These sentences reflect a broader academic idea, that emotional understanding supports academic success. Universities and educational researchers increasingly recognize that empathy contributes to student engagement, well-being, and long-term achievement. Understanding these ideas helps English learners participate more confidently in academic discussions. When you can talk about empathy using clear, formal language, you are able to engage in conversations about education, learning, and student experience at a higher level. This is especially useful for university seminars, essays, and presentations, where both critical thinking and emotional awareness are valued.
In professional English, empathy is often discussed in the context of leadership, teamwork, and workplace communication. Modern organizations increasingly recognize that technical skills alone are not enough. How people communicate, listen, and respond to each other strongly affects productivity, motivation, and trust. Empathetic leaders take time to listen to employees and understand the challenges they face. This does not mean agreeing with every concern or avoiding difficult decisions. Instead, it means acknowledging people's experiences and responding with clarity and respect. An empathetic leader can say, "I understand this is difficult," while still maintaining expectations and responsibility. This is an important point for learners to understand. Empathy does not weaken leadership. It strengthens it. Leading with empathy means being aware of how decisions affect people and communicating those decisions thoughtfully. In professional English, you might hear phrases like, "Empathy improves team collaboration." "Empathetic leadership builds trust." Managers with empathy create more supportive work environments. These sentences often appear in business articles, leadership training materials, and workplace discussions. Notice that the language is calm, neutral, and respectful. The focus is on outcomes such as trust, cooperation, and communication, not emotions alone. For English learners, using the word empathy correctly in professional contexts can significantly improve how mature and competent you sound. Saying, "My manager shows empathy," or "empathy is important in teamwork," shows that you understand workplace dynamics, not just vocabulary. In meetings, emails, and interviews, empathy is often expressed through tone as much as words. Phrases like, "I understand your concern," "I appreciate the effort," or "Let's look at this together," communicate professionalism and emotional intelligence at the same time. When learners understand how empathy functions in professional English, they are better prepared to communicate effectively at work, build stronger relationships, and participate confidently in international or multicultural environments.
A common mistake English learners make is using empathy only in emotional or dramatic situations. Empathy is not only for big problems. It appears in small moments, daily stress, misunderstandings, or simple conversations. Another mistake is confusing empathy with agreement. You can understand someone's feelings without agreeing with their opinion. This distinction is very important in discussions and debates.
Empathy is closely connected to inequality. Understanding inequality requires empathy, the ability to imagine life from someone else's perspective. Without empathy, discussions about inequality remain abstract. With empathy, they become human. This is why empathy is often described as a foundation for social understanding and fairness.
Now, pause the podcast for a moment and try to complete these sentences. Empathy means I showed empathy when... Empathy is important because you don't need perfect grammar. Focus on meaning. Try to connect the word empathy to a real moment in your life. This practice helps move the word from passive understanding to active use.
Empathy is not about having the right words. It's about creating space for understanding. When you truly understand empathy, your English becomes more than correct, it becomes human. You learn not just how to speak, but how to connect. And that is one of the most powerful uses of language.
As you finish this episode, notice how empathy appears in your conversations today, how people speak, how they listen, and how you respond. If you'd like to continue learning English one meaningful word at a time, you're always welcome here. Thank you for listening, and we'll continue the conversation in the next episode.